everyone. I hope you're having a great Easter so far. And I thought it would be a great way to finish up our Easter series on Easter Sunday. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the resurrection of Jesus and what happened right after that. But first, I want to talk to you about my moving to MC. When I moved to Mississippi College, I got this overwhelming sense of loneliness for a little while. And the reason is I knew a couple of people down here. Like I knew my roommate and I knew a couple of the people I was playing baseball with. But I had left a lot behind in my hometown. You see, I left behind my, at the time, girlfriend, now wife, because she was still going to school up there. I'd left behind some teammates from the baseball team at Northwest, and I'd left behind my family too, and a lot of friends that were now 2.5 hours away, which is not necessarily the easiest distance to cover if you need something. So I started to feel this sense of loneliness. And the thing about loneliness is that it didn't just stop there, but it affected other parts of my life. It affected decisions that I made. It affected beliefs that I had. It affected doubts that I had. And it even affected my fears and my anxieties and my worries. And I'm sure you felt that sense of loneliness too at some point or another. Maybe it's your family had to move and you weren't around the same friends. Or maybe your friend group just changed or you stopped having to be friends with certain people. Or maybe you've gone through a breakup. Or maybe you've lost a loved one that you were very, very close to. Whatever it is for you, I know that all of us at some point have experienced this feeling of being on our own. And that kind of being on your own is a lot different than independence or freedom, right? Independence and freedom are good things. Like when for some of the older students, when you first get to start driving and you get to go where you want to go and do things that you'd like to do, and you don't have to rely on a ride to get everywhere. That's a good feeling, right? But the feelings that we get when we feel lonely or alone are completely different. We start to feel like no one understands what we're going through, or that we're not going to be good enough to make it on our own and we have to be. Or maybe we just generally feel more afraid and more worried about things once we're alone. And the difference here also is that loneliness leads to hopelessness, and hopelessness leads to overwhelming sensation, in that sense that we're going to be overwhelmed. And the reason is that God didn't create human beings to be lonely. He didn't create us to be by ourselves. He created us to be in relationship, specifically in relationship with Him. But that's how we were designed. And the way that we look at loneliness can scare us sometimes. But what happened on the very first Easter can be a huge game changer for how we look at our loneliness in our lives. So we're going to look at a part of the early Easter story that a lot of time kind of gets overlooked. We just don't really think about too much, and that's the days between the death and the resurrection, because we're going to look at what the disciples were doing at this time. Now, you see, the disciples didn't know the end of the story, and they didn't necessarily know that Jesus was going to come back, because if they did, then they wouldn't have acted the way that they did that we see. You see, they fled and they hid and they were feared for their lives because they felt like they were alone because Jesus had left. And that's why they got so excited when they did see Him after the resurrection, when they physically touched Him and could see the scars in His hands. And then He left again. But they didn't get that sense of loneliness this time, and this is why. We're going to look at it. And it has to do with some things that Jesus said. And Luke recorded 2 books in the Bible. We have the book of Luke, of course, and then we have the book of Acts. And the book of Acts tells us the acts of the disciples after Jesus had left. But first we need to get to John so that we can see why we're looking at this. So in John chapter 16, verse 7, Jesus says this: "But in fact, it is best for you that I go away, because if I don't, the advocate won't come. If I do go away, then I will send him to you." And so Jesus uses this word advocate. And an advocate is somebody who helps you and defends you and comforts you, right? And the advocate that Jesus is talking about here is the Holy Spirit. You see, the Holy Spirit was sent on behalf of Jesus to his people. And the good news about that, why Jesus wanted to do that, is because that meant that the Spirit of Jesus could be loosed everywhere. It wasn't just, Jesus physically being God, but his Spirit came down on the believers, and then he was everywhere. And right before he left, right, he reminded the disciples about something that he said right before he was crucified. And we find that in the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 8. And this is what he reminded his disciples. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Jesus reminded them that the Holy Spirit was on the way, and even though he was leaving, they weren't going to be alone. And it's exactly what happened. The Holy Spirit came, and on the day that we call Pentecost, and he gave the church power. And they didn't seem like they were going to be very powerful. You see, at the time in Acts, they were doing churches in homes, and they were kind of having to do it under the radar because they were being persecuted by the Roman rule at the time. And they just kind of seemed powerless. But what the Holy Spirit did is it gave power to the people who believed in Jesus. And it changed, and this idea changes our lives today, 2,000 years later, because Easter means that you're never alone. The things that happened on the first Easter Sunday mean that you're never alone, because Jesus did send his Spirit. And the question that I really want to ask for you is what if this is real? I don't know if you've considered it before or if you believe it. I don't know where you're at right now. But what I want to ask is, what if this is real? What if God's Spirit really is here and ready to help you? What does that mean for you? How does that change the way that you live? How does it feel to know that you can talk to him anytime, at any place, for any reason? How does it feel to know that you're stronger than you think you are? Because you have the power that raised Jesus from the dead living inside of you if you are a believer. And the good news, too, is that the power of God and other believers is going to be there to support you as well. How does that feel? To know that there are other believers out there that are there to lift you up, to encourage you, to strengthen you on your walk, in your service to Jesus Christ. You see, Easter means you're never alone. And imagine Jesus looking you in the eyes and saying, I'm always with you in every battle, in every circumstance. And you know what the good news is this Easter? You don't have to imagine that, because it's really true. The Holy Spirit makes it a reality. And Jesus is there with you in every circumstance, if you believe in him and have faith in what he did for you 2,000 years ago.